Before I tell you how my family cast me out for being pregnant, and how the child they rejected ended up saving them years later, please subscribe. Because some stories are not about blame or tragedy. They're about how love finds its way back, even after everyone has stopped believing it could. I remember the smell of earth before rain. It was late spring, the kind of afternoon where the sun makes promises it doesn't intend to keep. I was standing in the yard, hanging laundry, when my mother called my name. She never yelled, not really. She had a way of saying my name that already carried disappointment in it, as if she'd practiced for this moment long before it came. Inside, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. My father sat at the table, newspaper folded neatly beside him, hands clasped together in that church-like way he did when he was angry, but didn't want to show it yet. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, her eyes already red from something that had not yet happened. On the table was an opened envelope. White, ordinary, almost harmless. My heart began to pound because I knew what was inside it before I even looked. He didn't raise his voice when he spoke. "Is it true?" I swallowed hard. "If you mean," he cut me off. "Don't make me say it, Ruth." I couldn't meet his eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "It's true." He leaned back in his chair, breathing in as if trying to take in enough air to stay calm. My mother turned her face away, hiding the tears that had already started. I wished she'd just scream. Silence hurts more. My father finally said, "You have shamed this family." I wanted to tell him that shame had already been my closest friend for weeks, that I'd carried it quietly, the same way I carried the small life inside me. But his voice was the kind that didn't leave room for explanations. "Who?" he demanded. "Who did this to you?" I could have lied. I could have said it was someone he didn't know, a stranger passing through town. But the truth was that it was Daniel, the boy who used to help him with the fences every summer, the one he said had decent hands and poor prospects, the one I loved in that quiet, foolish way you love someone when you still believe that love alone can feed you. When I said his name, my father's face changed completely. He stood up so fast the chair hit the wall. "Daniel Brooks?" His voice cracked like thunder. "That boy's been gone for months, and you let this happen before he even made his mind about marrying you?" "He promised," I started, but he slammed his fist on the table. "Promised?" he spat. "Promises are for people who keep them." My mother flinched at the sound. My heart thudded against my ribs. I wanted to reach her, but she wouldn't look at me. "I'm sorry," I said. It was all I had left. "Sorry?" he repeated, almost laughing. "You're sorry. You've brought disgrace on this house, on our name. The church will talk, the neighbors will talk, and I'm supposed to stand here and pretend I raised a daughter who doesn't even know decency?" Tears burned in my throat. "I didn't plan this, Father." "But it's not a sin to what?" he snapped. "To ruin your life? To ruin ours?" Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Pack your things. You leave this house today?" I thought he was bluffing. I even smiled weakly, waiting for my mother to speak, for her to stop him. But she didn't. She just pressed a hand to her mouth and whispered, "Please, don't make it worse." That was the moment I realized she wouldn't stop him. That love, when tested by fear, folds quietly. I begged. I said I'd stay out of sight, that no one would have to know. But his face was made of stone. He didn't shout anymore. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. "You are no longer ours." I went to my room in a daze. The walls that had watched me grow up suddenly felt foreign. I packed slowly. A few dresses, my mother's old shawl, and a small photograph of my grandmother, taken long before I was born. In it, she was smiling, holding a baby with that same calm strength my mother had lost somewhere along the way. When I came back downstairs, my father was standing by the door, arms crossed. My mother had turned her back completely. "Where will I go?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. "I don't have money," I said. "I don't even—" He reached into his pocket, took out a few crumpled bills, and set them on the table. "That's all you'll get from me." I picked up the money with shaking hands. "What about when the baby comes?" He looked straight through me. "That's not my concern." I turned to my mother, desperate. "Please, Mama," she finally faced me. Her eyes were wet, her lips trembling. "You should go now," she whispered, "before he says worse things." I wanted to scream, to ask if she'd forgotten what it meant to be a mother. But I couldn't. I was too tired, too broken. So I nodded, took my bag, and stepped outside. The air hit me like ice, though it was still spring. Clouds were rolling in, dark and heavy. I walked down the gravel path. the sound of my shoes echoing against the stones. When I reached the gate, I turned around. My father had already gone inside. My mother stood at the window, her hand against the glass, her face hidden behind it. I thought she'd open the door, call me back. She didn't. The first drops of rain fell as I reached the main road. By the time I made it to the bus stop, it was pouring. I sat on the bench, soaked to the bone, clutching my small suitcase and the photograph of my grandmother. My stomach twisted. Fear, hunger, maybe the child moving inside me. I whispered, "It's okay. I'm here." And for the first time, I realized I was talking not to myself, but to someone who was listening from the inside. When the bus arrived, I didn't even ask where it was going. I just paid, sat down, and watched the world slide away through the fogged window. Every mile between me and that house felt like a wound closing too slowly. I ended up in a small town an hour away, the kind of place that smells of rain and bread. I found a room above a bakery, small and cheap, with peeling wallpaper and a view of a narrow alley. The landlady didn't ask questions. She saw the bump under my coat and simply said, "Rent's due on Fridays. No noise after 10. I nodded, grateful for her indifference. That night, lying on the narrow bed, I cried until I couldn't breathe. But when the tears finally stopped, I realized something strange. I wasn't empty. I was terrified, yes, but somewhere under the fear was a flicker of something else. Maybe hope, maybe defiance, maybe both. The days passed quietly. I found work washing dishes at a small cafe owned by a woman named Marjorie. She was rough around the edges, always chewing on something. Gum, food, her own impatience. But she paid me on time, and when she noticed how pale I'd gotten one morning, she pressed a sandwich into my hands without a word. "You eat for two now," she said. "Don't think I don't notice." I froze, unsure whether to lie. But her eyes softened. "I was married once," she said. "Didn't last. You'll be fine. We women always are, even when we're not." That became our rhythm. Quiet work, short conversations, small mercies. I learned to stretch a coin, to sew ripped seams, to make tea strong enough to disguise the taste of sadness. I stopped checking the calendar. I stopped waiting for anyone to call. One night, I felt the baby move for the first time. A soft flutter, like a secret being whispered under my skin. I placed my hand over my stomach and laughed, real laughter, for the first time in months. "You're real," I said. "You're really here." For weeks, that thought kept me alive. But the day Noah, though I didn't know his name yet, decided to arrive, it was cold and raining again. I had gone to work despite the pain in my back. Marjorie noticed immediately. "Go," she said. "Go to the hospital. I can't afford—" "Go!" I made it halfway before collapsing near the bakery. Someone must have seen me because when I opened my eyes, I was in a small hospital room, fluorescent lights humming above me, the air smelling of antiseptic and new beginnings. When they placed him in my arms, everything else disappeared. The shame, the hunger, the fear. He was so small, so fragile. Yet he looked at me like I was the only person in the world who made sense. His skin was warm, his hair dark, and his tiny hand curled around my finger as if to say, "Don't worry, Mama, I've got you." I named him Noah because it meant rest. Because after all the storms, he was the first peace I'd known. That night, holding him close, I made a promise. Not to God, not to my parents, but to him. "I'll never turn my back on you," I whispered, "even if the whole world does." Outside, the rain kept falling, washing away everything that had come before. Inside, under the thin hospital light, a new life. 2 lives began. I brought Noah home wrapped in a hospital blanket that smelled like starch and lullabies. The room above the bakery had never looked so small, but somehow, with him inside it, it felt like a cathedral. Quiet, necessary, sacred. I slept in short slices of time between his breaths, my hand on his chest, afraid that if I let go, he might float away. In the morning, I woke to the softest sound I'd ever heard, my son sighing in his sleep, as if even dreams were gentle to him. I whispered, "We're still here," and meant both the miracle and the work. There is a pace the world keeps for new mothers without a husband or a plan. Slow when you need money, fast when you need sleep. I learned it in days. Marjorie wouldn't hear of me coming back to the cafe too soon. Then shoved an envelope into my coat pocket 2 weeks later with a grumbled, "If you apologize, I'll take it back." When she saw me washing dishes with Noah swaddled to my chest, she adjusted the sling with the tenderness of someone who remembered a softer version of herself. "A woman can do anything with 2 hands and a stubborn heart," she muttered, and I decided it was a blessing. Money, though, is a language blessings don't always speak. Rent came due the way sunrise does, on time, without apology. I sold the few things I'd kept for sentiment and kept the few things I needed for sense. On good days, Noah slept while I cleaned the cafe before dawn, the bell on the door chiming when the first regulars arrived with newspaper breath and habits for conversation. On bad days, he cried in a thin thread that pulled through my spine until I thought I might unravel. On both kinds of days, I loved him more than I had words for. Sleep became a currency more precious than any bill I folded twice before spending. I learned to nap sitting up, to stand while swaying without music, to eat toast with one hand and repair a torn pocket with the other. The repair started as necessity and grew into skill. My mother had taught me the simple stitches when I was small, her fingers sure, needle flashing like a promise that even broken things could be made useful again. Now, at the tiny table under the peeling window, I unpicked seams and set them right. People noticed. One regular asked if I could fix a lining. Another brought a torn hem and a story of how it had happened at a wedding where all the wrong things were said. I said yes because saying yes is sometimes the only tool you have. A corner of the room became a workbench. I found a secondhand machine with a foot treadle and a stubborn temperament. When the needle jammed, I talked to it like a child who needed encouragement and consequences in equal measure. I kept a biscuit tin for coins and a notebook for names, each request a thread I didn't want to drop. Marjorie let me pin a handwritten sign beside the till. Repairs and alterations. Fair prices. No judgment. People laughed at the last line and then relaxed their shoulders as if permission had a weight I could lift from them. Noah grew the way children do. Overnight, in front of me. 10 fingers learned to hold, then reach, then insist. He watched my hands sew, as if they were writing in a language he would one day read. He stared at other faces with a calm curiosity that made people kinder in their own skin. "He's an old soul," someone said, and I smiled because maybe he was. Ancient patience in a new body, proof that time is not just forward. I had promised I wouldn't count months, but I counted them anyway. With each, the ache for my mother sharpened and dulled, depending on the weather of my heart. I didn't miss my father. I missed the idea that fathers could be shelter. On a Tuesday in winter, when snow made the streets slow and soft, I opened the mailbox to find an envelope addressed in his careful hand. The postmark was our old town. I stood in the stairwell with the letter in my palm and felt the old house settle into my bones. Then I tore it in half, then halved it again, not because I was brave, but because I wasn't ready to belong to anyone's version of me but my own. The paper made the smallest sound when it fell, like a choice you hear only because you have to live with it. Work turned into work. Repairs became alterations. Alterations turned into small designs made from remnants. Skirts from men's shirts, children's dresses from tablecloths with stains avoided by intention. I named the little project Scraps because everything honest starts out with the pieces you can't afford to waste. A woman brought me her mother's coat and asked if I could make it fit her without changing its memory. I did. And when she cried, I pretended I was threading a needle so she could have her grief in private. The biscuit tin grew heavier. Sometimes I lifted the lid just to hear the coins clink, proof that effort had a sound. Marjorie watched me without interference, and interfered without announcing it. She'd slip leftovers into my bag and call it inventory management. She'd give me an extra 10 minutes when a seam needed unpicking. "You're building something," she said once, as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "Just don't forget to build yourself too." I didn't know what that meant, but I nodded like a promise. Noah's first words were not nouns. He said more and up and again, which felt like the verbs of our lives. He learned the cafe rhythm, morning clatter, afternoon lull, evening goodbye, and waved at the regulars like a mayor. People started bringing him little gifts. An orange, a wooden train, a book with a lion whose mane looked like a fire my son could put his hand into without getting burned. He turned 1, then 2, and on his 3rd birthday we had cake in the back room and 3 candles that dripped wax onto his grin. I blew out the last one because he laughed too hard to remember breath. When he asked about his father, it was not with accusation. "Who is he?" Noah said one night, his head heavy on my shoulder, the kind of sleepy boldness children use to approach doors adults knock forever on. I didn't say Daniel's name. I said, "A man I once loved and don't anymore." Noah thought about this seriously, then said, "Okay." with the grace of someone who trusted that love didn't need to be mapped to be real. People think you heal by forgetting. I didn't forget. I made new memories that didn't have to argue with the old ones. Every so often, the bus would pass the turnoff to my old town, and my breath would shorten for a stop or two. On those days, I held Noah's hand harder and thought about my grandmother's smile, the picture I kept on the dresser, the way she held a baby like treasure and responsibility at once. Years, and they were years, taught me the mathematics of enough. Enough rent to sleep without counting. Enough food to say yes when Noah asked for seconds. Enough work to plan next week's groceries without superstition. I learned to forgive the weather for being itself. I learned the names of fabrics just by touch. I learned that kindness can be a seam you can't see until it's holding everything. Then, on a rainless summer morning that pretended it had no agenda, a woman came in I didn't recognize. She was neatly dressed, not local, the kind of tidy that belongs to a life with appointment cards. She ordered tea and watched me gather change as if the act might tell her something important. When there was no one else at the counter, she set a thick envelope down. "Ruth?" she asked. Hearing my name from a stranger's mouth made my stomach turn in a slow circle. "I'm Claire," she said. "From back home." I didn't invite her to sit, and she didn't expect it. She slid the envelope closer. "Your father asked me to find you. He's unwell." She searched my face for a softness I didn't have to give. "He wants to see you." The words did not split me the way I would have predicted. Instead, they landed like a stone in a shallow pond, disturbance traveling outward in fair circles, visible, inevitable. I didn't touch the envelope. "How did you find me?" "Sheer persistence," she said with a rueful smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He kept everything. Every report card. Every church bulletin with your name in it. The more he tried to cut you out of the story, the more you stayed in the margins." She looked at Noah, who was at a corner table making a city out of sugar packets. "Is that?" "My son," I said. I didn't offer his name, as if names were a currency I had to count. "He looks like you," she said, then corrected herself softly. "And like your mother." "Does he?" I asked, and allowed myself a small private ache. She pushed the envelope again. "He's at St. Mark's. There are things to settle. He asked me to apologize to you." She winced, as if the sentence had barbs and she'd pulled it through her mouth anyway. "He isn't good with apologies." "No," I said. "He's good with consequences and other people paying them." Claire was quiet for a long beat, then nodded. "You don't have to go," she said, surprisingly gentle. "No one will think less of you if you don't." "I will," I said, and heard the unexpected truth in it. She left me with the envelope and a name I hadn't said out loud in years. The hospital that meant end of harvests, end of men who stood straighter than their crops. In the quiet after she left, I opened the envelope with a butter knife. Inside were two things: a letter in my father's hand and a small photograph of our house. The window where my mother had once pressed her palm to the glass, like a question she couldn't ask. The letter did not begin with, "I'm sorry." It began with Ruth. Then, "I have been ill. The doctors say I am not the man I was. Maybe that is good. If you will come, come soon. If you will not, then know that I—" The sentence wandered across the page and ended without landing, as if the word love were a river he did not know how to cross. At the bottom, "Bring the boy if you wish. I have never met him. That is my fault." Noah found me reading and rested his chin on the table, upside down the way children take in the world. "What is it?" he asked. "A letter from your grandfather? The mean one?" he asked, because children hear what you don't say. "Only the afraid one," I said. "Afraid people do mean things when they think it will keep them safe." I showed him the photograph of the house. "That's where I grew up." "It looks small," he said, then generous, "but nice." It was both. He traced the edge of the picture with his finger. "Do you want to go?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to explain that wanting is a poor compass when the landscape is made of old wounds and newer duties. "I don't know," I said, and he nodded as if uncertainty were a language he could translate. That night, after Noah slept, I sat at the little table with the needlework laid aside and made a different sort of pattern. 2 lists, reasons to go, reasons to stay. On the go side, I wrote dignity and goodbye and not being a person who runs forever. On the stay side, I wrote protect your peace and he chose and you owe nothing. The list did not balance. Life isn't math. In the end, I chose the verb I'd been practicing since the day my father closed his door. to become. Becoming required walking into rooms I had survived leaving. Marjorie didn't ask for explanations when I told her I needed 2 days. "Take 3, she said, not looking up from her ledger. "Being brave makes you slow. Give it time." When I packed, I took as little as I had the first time. Some clothes, bread, a thermos of tea, Noah's lion book, the photo of my grandmother who had learned how to smile through the lesson. We took the early bus because beginnings borrow courage from sunrise. The town had shrunk the way places do when you outgrow the fear that built them. The houses looked closer together, the church smaller, the grocery unchanged down to the bell that stuck and made every entrance sound like a half-remembered tune. St. Mark's smelled like hand sanitizer and hope, which is the most honest smell a hospital can make. My father lay in a bed by a window that framed a sycamore tree. He had thinned into a version of himself that looked like the outline drawings I used to color in as a child. When he saw me, his mouth opened and then remembered it didn't know what to say. I saw the exact second he saw Noah and understood math that had nothing to do with numbers. Years missing, moments lost, mercy undeserved, Ruth, he said. And it sounded like a prayer or a cough, I couldn't tell which. His eyes clicked to Noah again. "Is this my son?" I said. "Noah." My father's hand moved like it weighed more than the rest of him. "Hello," he said to Noah, and the word was so ordinary it felt extraordinary. Noah waved, solemn and brave. "Hello," he replied. "I brought my book." We sat. The first minutes were the longest. Then time remembered how to be itself around people pretending at familiarity. We talked about the sycamore and how it dropped its leaves in a hurry, about the nurse who sang under her breath when she took blood, about how hospitals make you grateful for ordinary light. He did not apologize and I did not forgive. We endured the middle without the mercy of an end. When Noah tired of adult pauses, he went to the window and narrated a story about a squirrel who had a job at the hospital sweeping leaves. My father laughed once, the surprised laugh of a life remembering how. He watched Noah as if each second made him braver or smaller. I couldn't tell which. "Your mother wanted to come," he said finally, voice thin. "She thought you wouldn't want it. I told her I didn't deserve it, so she should save her strength." It was the closest he came to the word I needed. It wasn't enough, but it wasn't nothing. When we left, he touched my sleeve the way a man tests a fabric he can't afford. "Thank you," he said, and it sounded like a debt at last named, if not paid. On the bus back, Noah leaned his head on my shoulder and fell asleep with the kind of trust that made the day make sense. I watched the fields unspool and thought about how visiting had not broken me and not fixed me. It had only been real. Maybe that was the point. Not to win the past, not to erase it, but to live through it without becoming it. Work waited, and I welcomed it. The machine felt less stubborn. Maybe I was the one who had softened. I took in a wedding dress for a woman whose mother had cried at the fitting, because joy can be heavy when you carry it alone. I let out a suit for a widower who had started eating again and kept apologizing for the way life returns without permission. I stitched straight lines and curved seams and learned which fabrics forgave mistakes. In the mirror above the work table, Noah and I were reflected at odd angles. A small family that made sense anyway. The letter had made a path, and like all paths, it led to a door I did not yet want to open. I didn't know that the door would open itself one night with wind and a wrong spark, that it would be Noah, my son, my old soul, who would decide what to save first when everything started to burn. That is another chapter. This one ends where all building does, with hands, with breath, with a quiet promise spoken into a room that knows your voice. That night, I tucked Noah in and sat by the window with the work I could do after dark. Hemming, mostly, and the kind of mending that doesn't show. The town was quiet, as if it too were gathering itself. I thought about scraps, of fabric, of courage, of days you think won't add up and somehow do. I thought about my mother humming while she sewed, the way she would knot the thread with her teeth and say, "There, that will hold." I touched the knot I just made and whispered, "So will this." Then I switched off the lamp and let the room trust the night. In the silence, I could hear Noah breathing in his sleep, steady, sure, an answer to a question I hadn't known how to ask the day my family turned their backs. We were not rich. We were not safe from sorrow. We were not done. But we were here, and sometimes here is the bravest place a person can stand. There are sounds that never leave you, a baby's first cry, a door closing behind you, the hush of people deciding not to say your name. But silence, real silence, isn't the absence of noise. It's the echo of everything you wish someone had said and didn't. For years, I lived inside that silence like it was a house I couldn't afford to move out of. Noah was 10 when he first asked about my family in a way I couldn't brush aside. We were walking home from school, leaves crunching underfoot, his backpack bouncing with every step. He was quiet for a long time, then asked, "Why don't I have grandparents like the other kids?" I hesitated. "You do," I said. "They just live far away." "How far?" "Far enough." He looked at me, eyes the same color as the sky before rain. "Did they do something bad?" I stopped walking. "No," I said. "They just didn't understand." "Understand what?" "That love doesn't always look like they think it should." He didn't ask again, but the question stayed between us. Hanging like unwashed linen, present, a little heavy, smelling faintly of the past, the years had softened me in ways I hadn't noticed. Work was steady. Scraps had turned from a side job into something people talked about. A local magazine even ran a piece about my upcycled clothing designs, though I hated the word upcycled. I didn't make trash into beauty. I reminded beauty it had never been trash. One evening I found Noah at my work table, tracing the outline of a dress pattern. "Do you ever miss them?" he asked quietly. I didn't have to ask who. "Sometimes," I said. "But missing isn't always a reason to go back." He thought for a moment, pencil hovering midair. "If they said sorry, would you forgive them?" "Forgiving someone doesn't mean forgetting," I said. "It just means you stop letting the hurt tell you what to do." He nodded like he understood, though he couldn't, not really. Not yet. The next Saturday, I came home to an empty apartment. The door was unlocked, his shoes gone, his jacket missing from the hook. At first, I told myself he was downstairs with the neighbors' kids. But when 20 minutes passed, my breath began to shorten. I called his name until my throat ached. The neighbors hadn't seen him. The bakery downstairs hadn't either. Then I saw the note on the kitchen table. "Don't be mad. I just want to know them." My hands shook. The handwriting was careful but young. I felt the air disappear from the room. He had gone to find them. I ran to the bus station with a heart that wouldn't beat in rhythm. The clerk said a boy matching his description had bought a child's ticket to Maple Creek, my hometown. He'd told the driver he was visiting his grandfather. I caught the next bus, hands clenched so tight the nails dug half-moons into my palms. The road blurred past, a replay of my exile in reverse. Every curve was a memory, every mile a question. What if he finds them? What if they hurt him? What if he never forgives me for not letting him see? When I reached the town, I didn't head home. I headed to the only place that had never changed, the church on Main Street. Father Graham still stood by the steps, older, slower. He looked up and blinked in disbelief. "Ruth Carter," he said softly, as if saying my name might summon ghosts. "Father, have you seen a boy?" 10 years old, brown hair." He nodded. "He came by an hour ago. Asked where your parents lived." I told him. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran. The streets felt smaller than I remembered. When I turned the corner and saw the old house, my legs nearly gave out. The porch sagged now. Paint peeled from the railings. Curtains drawn. But in the window I saw movement. A child, my child, and beside him an old man in a chair. My father. I stopped at the gate, frozen between fury and fear. Noah was showing him something. His sketchbook, I think. Pointing, smiling. My father was listening. Actually listening. The sight broke something open inside me that anger had kept sealed for years. When Noah noticed me, he jumped up. "Mom, he's nice. He said he's sorry." My father stood slow, trembling. Time had taken the steel from his spine. His hair was white, his hands thin. "Ruth," he said, voice raspy. "You came." I wanted to scream, to remind him I hadn't been the one to leave. But the sight of him, diminished, mortal, silenced me. "What are you doing with my son?" I asked. He lowered his gaze. "Talking," he said. "Listening, trying. Trying now doesn't fix then." "I know," he whispered. "But maybe it's a start." Behind him, the house looked smaller, the air still thick with the ghosts of all the things we hadn't said. My mother appeared at the door, her face pale, older but unmistakable. "Ruth," I stepped back. "Don't." Tears filled her eyes. "Please, let me see him." Noah, innocent and brave, looked between us. "She's my grandma, isn't she?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded. He walked over to her and, without hesitation, hugged her. My mother froze, then folded around him like a woman collapsing into grace she thought she'd lost forever. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. The years of silence roared in my ears. My father watched quietly, eyes wet. "You look like her," he said softly. I swallowed hard. "She looks like herself." Inside, the house smelled of dust and boiled tea. The walls were lined with the same old photographs, though one, mine, was gone. My room had become a storage space, boxes piled where my bed had been. My father sat down slowly, the effort visible. "I kept thinking time would give me courage," he said. "But time doesn't give. It just waits until you take it. Why now?" I asked. "Why right after all these years?" He coughed, the sound rough. "The doctors say it's my heart. I wanted to see you before—" He didn't finish. "Before I can't. I wanted to hate him for making me feel pity. But grief is never clean." "You didn't just lose a daughter," I said. "You made me lose a family," he nodded, tears trembling in his lashes. "And I have lived with that every day." Noah sat on the floor, flipping through an old photo album my mother had pulled out. She was pointing to pictures of me as a child, telling stories softly, as if afraid the words might break if spoken too loud. "She kept everything," my father said, following my gaze. "Your drawings, your letters, even the newspaper about your sewing business." Something twisted in my chest. "You read about that?" He smiled weakly. "Your mother cut it out. Said she always knew you'd make something beautiful. The kindness hurt worse than cruelty ever had." When the day faded, I told Noah it was time to go. My mother asked if we'd stay for dinner, her voice trembling with hope. I wanted to say no, but Noah looked at her and said, "Can we, Mom? Just tonight?" I nodded against my better judgment. Dinner was quiet. My father hardly ate. My mother kept trying to fill the silence with stories of neighbors I no longer remembered. Every now and then, she'd glance at me and smile the way she used to when she brushed my hair before church. Gentle, apologetic, unfinished. When we stood to leave, my father reached for my hand. His grip was weak but steady. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing him, for letting me see you." "I didn't come for you," I said quietly. "I came for him," he nodded. "Then I'm glad he brought you anyway." Noah hugged him before we left. My father closed his eyes as if memorizing the feeling. My mother stood at the door, watching us walk away, her hands pressed together in prayer or desperation. I couldn't tell which. That night, after Noah fell asleep on the bus home, I looked at him and realized how much of me he carried. Not my shame, but my strength. He was the bridge I hadn't meant to build between what had been and what could still be. I didn't forgive my father that day, but something in me stopped hating him. Because in his eyes, frail and frightened, I saw what fear does to love, and it teaches it to hide. And I decided that I would never let fear teach my son that same lesson. When we got home, I tucked Noah into bed and turned off the light. The room was quiet except for the steady hum of the world still turning. I stood by the window, watching the street below, thinking of my father's voice, my mother's trembling hands, the dust on the table where I once sat as a girl. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a pause. The kind before an answer finally arrives. You never know which ordinary night will become the one you remember forever. Sometimes tragedy doesn't come announced in thunder. It slips in quietly, on a wind that smells of wood and rain and something ending. That evening had been calm, almost kind. The heat of late summer clung to the air. Noah and I had returned from a week in Maple Creek, visiting, helping my mother clean out closets, walking the fields that had once been forbidden ground. My father had been tired, weaker than before, but there was light in him again. Small, flickering, but there. He told Noah stories about when he was a boy, and for the first time, I'd seen my son laugh at something my father said. That laugh had been the beginning of something healing I hadn't yet named. We came home to our little town, the bakery's windows glowing gold, the smell of sugar and cinnamon in the stairwell. I put Noah to bed early. He'd fallen asleep before I finished humming. I remember thinking, this is peace. This is what it looks like when you survive long enough to see the other side. I didn't know how short that peace would be. The call came just before dawn, a voice I recognized. Father Graham's shaking. "Ruth, it's your father. There's been a fire. You need to come." The world narrowed to a single sound, the pulse in my ears. I didn't even ask how bad. I just threw on a coat, woke Noah, and we ran for the first train. The landscape outside the window was a blur. Trees, fog, the gray edge of morning. I held Noah's hand the whole way, so tight he finally said, "Mom, it's okay. We'll get there." But he didn't know that getting there wasn't the part I feared. It was what we'd find. When we arrived at Maple Creek, smoke still curled above the fields. The air smelled of ashes and memory. The house I'd grown up in, the one that had once held every version of who I was half gone. The roof had collapsed. The porch was nothing but blackened wood and embers. A neighbor, Mrs. Collins, ran toward me. "They're at the hospital," she said. "Your father and your boy." "My boy?" I choked. "What do you mean?" She gripped my arm. "He went back in. Your son? He went back into the house to pull your father out. The fire started in the kitchen. Everyone thought they were both gone, but he—" Her voice broke. "He saved him." The world tilted sideways. I ran. I don't remember how I got to the hospital, only the feeling of my lungs burning, the corridor spinning, the sterile smell that never belongs to good news. When I burst into the room, Noah was sitting upright in bed, his face streaked with soot, his hair singed at the edges, a bandage across his arm. My father lay in the next bed, oxygen tubes in his nose, his chest rising and falling slowly. "Noah," I gasped, dropping beside him. "Oh my God, baby," he smiled faintly. "I'm okay, Mom, he couldn't walk." The fire was everywhere. He trailed off. I didn't think. I just went. I gathered him into my arms, tears finally coming. "You could have died," he whispered into my shoulder. So could he. The doctor stepped in then. A kind-faced woman with tired eyes. "Your son's lucky," she said softly. "He has smoke inhalation, a few burns, but he's strong. The old man—" She looked toward my father. "He's stable for now." I sat between them, my son and my father, and realized that life had drawn a circle without asking for my permission. The child they'd cast out had returned with the child who had saved them. Everything had come back to fire, to the moment of choice between destruction and grace. When my father woke, his first word was my name. "Ruth," I went to him, hesitant. He looked at Noah first, then at me, and his eyes filled. He struggled for breath. I thought I was done. I saw the flames and I thought, this is what I deserve. And then he was there. He turned his gaze toward Noah again. "You saved me," Noah shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. You're my grandpa." My father began to weep. I hadn't seen him cry since I was 5. "He's braver than I ever was," he said. "He saved more than my life." I sat down beside him. "He shouldn't have had to," I whispered. "I know." His hand trembled as he reached for mine. "I've spent years asking God for forgiveness, and he sent it wearing your son's face." I wanted to resist the tenderness rising inside me, wanted to keep my anger like a shield. But I couldn't. It fell away, soft as ash. "I can't change what I did," he said. "But I can say it if you'll let me." I waited. "I'm sorry, Ruth, for everything. For not standing by you. For making you think you weren't loved. You were. I was just too proud to show it." The apology came late, but not too late. Tears blurred the edges of everything. I took his hand. "I know," I said. "And I forgive you." It wasn't mercy. It was survival. Letting go wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. About ending the inheritance of silence before it reached my son. We stayed in Maple Creek for days. Volunteers helped clear what was left of the house. My mother sat on the porch steps that still stood, sifting through the blackened remains of photo albums, touching them like relics. When she found the one of me as a baby, the pages burned at the corners, but the picture intact. She pressed it to her heart and sobbed. Noah helped where he could, quiet and sure, like he understood something bigger than I could explain. "It's just a house," he said once, handing me a half-melted spoon. "We're still here." His words carried more truth than any sermon I'd ever heard. That night, I walked out behind the remains of the barn. The stars were faint, blurred by smoke, but one shone brighter than the rest. I thought of the first time I'd left this place. How I'd walked away with nothing but fear and a promise. Now I was back, not as a daughter begging for acceptance, but as a mother who had built a life from her own hands. I had been cast out, yes, but the child who'd been born of that rejection had carried me back into grace. My father was discharged a week later. He moved into a small rented place on the edge of town with my mother. Every time I visited, Noah ran straight to him, and they'd sit for hours talking about everything and nothing. Fishing, sewing, how fires can cleanse the earth if they don't consume it all. One afternoon, I overheard them. My father said, "You know, Noah, when I was your age, I thought strength meant being right. Now I know it means being kind." Noah grinned. "Mom says that too." "She's right," my father said. She always was. I turned away then, letting them have that moment. The ache in my chest was no longer pain. It was something gentler, quieter. Healing has a sound if you know how to listen for it. Months later, the town rebuilt the house. Not as it had been, but as something new. We planted a tree beside it in honor of what had been lost and what had been found. My father insisted on helping, though his hands shook. "You start over," he said, patting the soil. "You don't undo. You begin again." That night, Noah asked if we could stay over. The rebuilt home still smelled of fresh wood and paint. My mother made tea, my father fell asleep in his chair, and I sat by the window watching the fireflies blink in the fields. I thought of everything that had burned. The house, the pride, the silence, and how somehow love had survived all of it. For years, I had believed that being cast out was the end of my story. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of my becoming, and it was Noah. The child they had rejected by rejecting me, who had written the ending I never could, I whispered. Almost to myself, "He saved you." And from the corner, "Half asleep," my mother answered. "He saved us all. Time is a strange kind of mercy. It doesn't ask for permission to move forward. It just does. You wake up one morning and realize the house that once burned is now wrapped in ivy. The child you once carried on your hip is taller than you, and the pain you thought would define you has softened into something almost kind. That's how it was for us. It's been 15 years since the fire. 15 years since the night everything almost ended, and somehow began again. The house at Maple Creek stands quiet and steady, the boards seasoned by weather and forgiveness. My mother still tends the garden out back, her hands slower now, but sure. Every spring she plants daisies, the same kind that used to grow wild along the fence before the world fell apart. Noah comes home every Sunday. He drives up the old road in a silver truck with the windows down and music playing loud enough to make my mother shake her head, but smile anyway. He's 25 now, a teacher. Children follow him everywhere he goes like birds drawn to warmth. When he steps out of that truck, it feels like the whole yard exhales. He looks so much like Daniel sometimes, the same easy grin, the same restless energy, but his eyes are mine. Calm where Daniel's were wild. He once told me that teaching was his way of building something that didn't burn. I understood that in a way words could never explain. My father's chair is still by the window, empty now. He passed 5 years after the fire, one quiet autumn afternoon. He'd been reading when his heart finally gave out. My mother found him with a half smile on his lips, and the Bible open on the passage about prodigal children. The last thing he ever said to me was, "You made a home out of exile, Ruth. That's faith." He'd asked to be buried behind the rebuilt house, under the sycamore tree that survived both the storm and his pride. We planted it when I was 5. It's taller than the roof now, branches reaching toward the sky like a prayer that finally learned patience. Every year on his birthday, Noah and I visit. We bring coffee instead of flowers, because he'd always said coffee was the one thing that could make him believe in heaven. My mother joins us when she can. She talks to him as if he's only stepped away for a moment. I think that's what love becomes after death. Conversation carried by memory. Sometimes people ask me how I forgave them, how I went from being the girl cast out in shame to the woman who came back by choice. I never know how to answer. Forgiveness wasn't a decision I made one day. It was something that happened slowly, the way mourning happens after a long night. You don't see the light right away, but you start to notice you can see your hands again. The truth is, I didn't come back for them. I came back for me, for the version of myself that had stood at that bus stop in the rain all those years ago, shaking, alone, carrying life inside her and thinking it was the end. I came back to show her it wasn't, that everything broken could still become something beautiful if you're stubborn enough to keep breathing. And maybe that's the point of every story we survive, to become the person we needed when we were scared. Noah built a small schoolhouse at the edge of town. Bright windows, chalkboards lined in sunlight, and a garden where he teaches children to grow things that feed them. Sometimes I visit after closing hours. He'll be sitting on the steps, sleeves rolled up, dirt on his hands, laughing with the same sound that once saved a man from dying. He doesn't talk about that night much, but once, when he was 18, he asked me, "Do you think he knew I forgave him before I did?" I told him yes, because forgiveness isn't something you say. It's something that moves through you, like warmth returning after a long cold. He nodded, eyes wet but steady. Then maybe that's why I ran into the fire. I touched his hand. No, I said softly. You ran into love. After my father's death, my mother moved into town with me for a while. She helped in the shop, Scraps, which had grown from a corner table into a small studio known for its quiet purpose. People still bring me their broken things. I still mend them, the way I've always mended, stitch by stitch, thread by thread, story by story. Sometimes I think I'm not fixing fabric at all. I'm fixing ghosts. My mother never spoke much about that night, the one when I left home with nothing but a suitcase and a photograph. But every now and then, she'd pause mid-stitch, sigh, and whisper, "You were so brave." I'd smile and shake my head. "No," I'd tell her. "I was terrified." She'd smile back. That's what makes it brave. When she passed, we buried her beside my father. Noah read the eulogy. He spoke about the power of second chances, about the way her hands taught him that even broken soil can bloom. As he spoke, I realized she'd found her own redemption long before she died. Quietly, in the rhythm of forgiveness, she stitched into every hem she touched. Now, at 43, I live in a house filled with light. Not the same one that burned, but one I built with my own earnings on the same land. The sycamore's roots run deep beneath it, carrying history like blood through veins. Some mornings, I still wake early, brew coffee, and sit by the window with the same cup my father once used. The wind moves through the branches, whispering things I swear I can almost understand. I don't dream of the past anymore. I live beside it. It's quieter that way. Sometimes I drive the road that leads to the old bus stop. The bench is still there, though the paint has long peeled and the wood has cracked. Teenagers sit there now, holding hands, whispering secrets they think are eternal. I stop and watch them sometimes. I wonder if they know that once, at that very spot, a girl sat in the rain believing her life was over, and that the life she was about to meet was the one that would save them all. I like to think the world remembers. Even when we don't, tonight the house is quiet. The air smells of rain. I light a single candle, not for mourning, but for memory. The flame flickers gently, casting shadows that look almost like the outlines of the people I loved, and lost, and found again. I walk to the window and look out at the fields. At the schoolhouse lights in the distance, glowing like fireflies. I can see Noah locking the gate, waving toward the house. His silhouette is steady, confident, alive, and I whisper into the dark. Words I once said to him the day he was born. You and I, that's all we have now. Only now, I know the rest of the sentence. And that's more than enough. They cast me out for being pregnant. They said I had ruined everything. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the child I carried would be the one to save them. He saved them from pride. He saved me from silence. He saved all of us from becoming the kind of people who forget how to love. And as the candle burns low, I smile, knowing that sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive in light. They arrive in fire. Because fire destroys, yes, but it also purifies, and what remains after the flames is always, always stronger. End of story.